The first sign appeared before sunrise. A sealed document moved through royal channels with unusual speed, bypassing routines that had remained unchanged for decades. By breakfast, palace insiders were already whispering about a decision so dramatic that few believed it could be real. Yet, behind closed doors, something extraordinary had happened, and Meghan's Sussex status stood at the center of it all. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the morning began with an emergency Privy Council discussion that few outside the highest circle were prepared for. It was not treated like ordinary paperwork. It was not handled like routine palace administration. The language surrounding it, according to insiders, was careful, cold, and deliberately restrained, as though every word carried the weight of a century-old rulebook suddenly brought back to life. Senior aides were reportedly told not to brief, not to explain, and not to calm the speculation too quickly. That silence only made the whispers louder. By mid-morning, the phrase "Sussex status" had begun circulating through private media channels, not as gossip, but as a warning that something long debated had finally reached the point of action. For years, Meghan's position within the royal structure had remained a symbol of unresolved tension. No longer a working royal, yet still tied to one of the most recognizable titles in the world. Now, according to palace observers, that old contradiction had returned with brutal force. Some believed preparations had quietly been underway for months, hidden beneath legal reviews, household consultations, and careful constitutional language. Others questioned whether such a decree could truly move without visible approval from the very top. But what made the moment explosive was not only the possibility of change, it was the timing. Before the public had even finished reading the first reports, royal households were said to be tense, guarded, and unusually disciplined. Nobody wanted to be the first voice to confirm too much. Nobody wanted to be blamed for saying what the palace itself had not yet dared to say. And that is where the mystery deepened. If this was only rumor, why did the machinery of the monarchy appear to tighten around it so quickly? If it was only paperwork, why did it feel like a line had been crossed before most people even knew a line existed? The answer, insiders whispered, was that the alleged Sunrise Decree was not born overnight. It was the result of pressure, resentment, strategy, and fear building behind palace walls until silence was no longer enough. But the alleged decree itself was only part of the story. The real mystery was why powerful figures suddenly decided the Sussex question could no longer be postponed. Titles inside the monarchy are never just words. They carry influence, legitimacy, privilege, and history stretching back centuries. And according to growing reports, it was precisely that history that turned Meghan's Sussex status into one of the most sensitive issues facing the institution. The title of Sussex was never meant to be casual decoration. It belonged to the old language of royalty, to the system that turns family names into national symbols and private identities into public duty. That is why, once Meghan and Harry stepped away from royal work, the question did not disappear. It waited. It followed them through interviews, business deals, public statements, and every debate over what it means to carry a royal title while living outside the daily discipline of royal service. Reports suggest that senior figures had grown increasingly uneasy about this unresolved gap. To supporters of the Sussexes, the title remained part of their identity, a mark of marriage, history, and personal connection. But to more traditional voices inside royal circles, it became something far more difficult. A royal badge still visible on the world stage, even when the duties behind it had been left behind. That tension created a wound the palace could cover, but never fully heal. Every new appearance, every public project, every mention of Sussex branding brought the same question back into the room. Could the monarchy protect its image while allowing royal status to function beyond palace control? Insiders claim this was not simply about Meghan as a person. It was about precedent. If one royal title could move freely between royal duty and private ambition, what would stop future generations from treating ancient honors like personal property? That fear reportedly made the issue dangerous. The monarchy survives on symbols, And once symbols become confused, public trust begins to weaken. By 2026, according to growing whispers, the old debate had reached a sharper edge. King Charles's reign had already been marked by strain, illness, transition, and the heavy pressure of keeping the institution steady. Prince William's future role added another layer of urgency, because every unresolved royal controversy now cast a shadow over the next era. Behind palace doors, the Sussex question was reportedly no longer being treated as a family disagreement. It was being studied as an institutional risk. That shift changed everything. What had once sounded like tabloid noise became, in the minds of some advisors, a matter of legacy, control, and constitutional clarity. The palace could endure criticism, it could survive scandal, but what it could not risk was a slow erosion of meaning around the very titles that held the royal structure together. And so the pressure grew quietly, then suddenly, until the silence around Meghan's Sussex status became louder than any announcement. Yet if concerns had existed for years, something new appears to have triggered the sudden urgency now gripping palace corridors. For months, royal watchers sensed tension beneath the surface. Then, according to multiple reports, a sequence of events unfolded that transformed quiet frustration into a matter demanding immediate attention from the monarchy's highest advisors. It began, insiders claim, with renewed disagreement over what royal representation was supposed to mean in a post-Sussex world. The old arrangement had always depended on a delicate balance. Harry and Meghan could build a life away from palace duty, but the connection to the crown would remain carefully managed, carefully worded, and carefully watched. Yet by 2026, that balance was reportedly beginning to crack. Every appearance, every public project, every headline carrying the Sussex name seemed to reopen the same uncomfortable question. Was the title still serving the dignity of the monarchy, or had it become a contested symbol outside the palace's reach? That question did not stay in the newspapers. According to palace whispers, it moved into private conversations among senior advisors, constitutional observers, and those who understood how dangerous blurred boundaries could become. The concern was not only image, it was control. If royal associations could be used in ways the institution could not guide, then the monarchy faced a problem deeper than publicity. It faced a slow weakening of authority. Reports suggest confidential reviews began quietly, not with drama, but with documents, legal language, and careful questions about precedent. What options existed? What powers could be invoked? What would be too extreme? What would be too weak? And above all, what would happen if nothing changed? That final question reportedly unsettled the room more than any other, because doing nothing had already carried a cost. Public debate had grown sharper. Supporters defended Meghan as unfairly targeted, while critics argued that royal status could not be separated from royal duty forever. In establishment circles, the phrase long-term consequence began to matter more than the latest headline. This was no longer about one interview, one brand, one argument, or one dramatic week. It was about the shape of the monarchy that Prince William would one day inherit. Sources close to palace administration suggest pressure slowly climbed upward, moving from quiet concern to urgent recommendation. The palace had survived years of noise, but this felt different. The scrutiny was no longer fading. It was hardening into a permanent question about what the crown would allow, what it would tolerate, and what it would finally refuse. And somewhere in that pressure, the alleged Sunrise Decree began to look less like a shocking overreaction, and more like the end of a long, silent countdown. As concern grew behind palace walls, attention shifted toward a body whose influence is rarely discussed publicly, but whose authority can reshape royal history. Most people rarely think about the Privy Council. Yet throughout British history, some of the most consequential decisions affecting the crown have passed through its quiet chambers, far from public view and political theater. That is why its name, once whispered in connection with Meghan's Sussex status, changed the temperature of the entire story. This was no longer ordinary palace gossip. It suggested procedure, authority, and the kind of ancient machinery that only begins to move when the institution believes something serious is at stake. The Privy Council exists in the shadowed corners of British power, where tradition and government meet under the authority of the Crown. Its role is often quiet, almost invisible, but that silence is exactly what makes it so powerful in the public imagination. Reports of unusual consultations among senior figures immediately raised questions. Who had been briefed? Who had been excluded? Was this merely a symbolic review, or was it the first step toward a sharper constitutional outcome? Legal experts, speaking carefully, began to speculate about the limits of royal status, the meaning of titles, and the difference between public identity and formal recognition. Some interpretations suggested that any move against Sussex standing would require political care, legal precision, and enormous caution. Others argued that the palace may have been seeking not a public battle, but a controlled administrative answer to a problem that had become too loud to ignore. The deeper the speculation went, the more the silence from official channels felt intentional. Palace officials refused to confirm rumors. They did not deny enough to calm the storm, and they did not explain enough to end it. That half-light created exactly the atmosphere where royal drama becomes explosive. Every withheld statement sounded like strategy. Every closed door suggested a hidden file. Every delayed response made observers wonder whether the alleged sunrise decree had already passed through hands that would never be named. And beneath it all sat the most dangerous question. Could the monarchy act decisively without appearing vindictive? That was the tightrope. If the institution moved too harshly, critics would call it punishment. If it failed to move at all, traditionalists would call it weakness. Inside that narrow space, the Privy Council's alleged involvement became a symbol of discipline, as though the Crown was reaching past emotion and into the old constitutional toolbox. For Meghan, this made the issue far more serious than public criticism. For the palace, it offered something colder than outrage: process. And process, in royal terms, can be devastating because it does not shout, it records. It does not argue, it decides. That is why speculation reached unprecedented levels. The public may have seen only rumors, but royal watchers sensed the movement of something older, slower, and more unforgiving than headlines. But while observers focused on legal procedures, another question emerged: who stood to gain from finally resolving the Sussex controversy? Every major royal decision creates winners and losers, and according to palace observers, the alleged sunrise decree was never simply about one title. It represented something far larger, a shift in influence that could shape the monarchy's future for years to come. Behind the careful language and controlled silence, reports suggest a deeper realignment was already underway. Prince William's voice, once treated as the voice of the future, was increasingly being read as part of the present. His role in long-term planning had reportedly grown stronger, not through loud public gestures, but through the quiet authority of an heir preparing for a reign shaped by disciplined service and fewer distractions. In that atmosphere, the Sussex issue became more than an old wound. It became a test of how the next era would define royal belonging. Would status be tied to duty, or could it survive without service? Would the monarchy continue absorbing controversy for the sake of family peace, or would it begin drawing harder lines for the sake of institutional survival? According to those watching closely, Princess Catherine's rising importance added another powerful layer. She represented steadiness at a time when the crown needed calm, and her public image stood in sharp contrast to years of conflict surrounding the Sussex story. That contrast mattered. On one side was the working royal model, controlled, loyal, patient, and rooted in daily service. On the other was a more complicated reality, where royal identity traveled far beyond palace boundaries and into global media storms. Palace observers believe this difference pushed senior figures toward a stronger emphasis on those still carrying the workload of the crown. It was not just about Meghan losing ground. It was about William and Catherine's model gaining ground. Royal households reportedly began adapting to this new reality with careful speed. Messaging tightened, internal expectations sharpened. Advisors studied how public trust responded to stability versus controversy. And the answer, according to some insiders, was becoming impossible to ignore. The public may enjoy drama, But the monarchy survives through confidence. It survives when people believe the institution knows who represents it, what it stands for, and where its limits begin. That is why the alleged decree felt so important. It was not only a reaction to the Sussex past, it was a signal about the succession future. If William's reign was already being prepared in outline, then unresolved titles, unclear roles, and divided loyalties could not be allowed to linger forever. So critics warned that such a move could appear harsh, even personal. But supporters of a firmer approach argued that delay had carried its own danger. The longer the question remained open, the more it weakened the line between royal duty and royal fame. And once that line disappears, the crown risks becoming exactly what it has always feared: a family brand instead of a national trust. Yet the greatest consequences may not have been institutional at all, they may have been deeply personal. If reports are accurate, the alleged decision landed with extraordinary force. For years, Meghan's relationship with the institution had been defined by conflict, disappointment, and competing narratives. Now, insiders claim a new chapter may have begun. The reaction, according to those following the Sussex circle, was not simple shock. It was something more layered. Disbelief mixed with anger, concern mixed with calculation, and beneath it all, the painful realization that the royal connection which had once opened every door might now narrowing in public view. Supporters reportedly saw the alleged decree as unfair, even cruel, arguing that Meghan had already paid a heavy price for stepping into one of the most unforgiving families in the world. Critics saw it differently. To them, this was not punishment. It was consequence. That divide spread quickly, turning the story into another battlefield in a conflict that had never truly ended. Media speculation grew with every hour. Would Meghan respond directly? Would Harry speak first? Would the Sussexes frame the alleged move as an attack on their identity, or would they stay silent and avoid giving the palace a fresh storm to manage? Each possibility carried risk. A strong public response could rally supporters, but it could also make the monarchy's case for distance appear stronger. Silence could look dignified, but it could also feel like defeat. That was the trap. The Sussex identity had always rested on a difficult balance: royal enough to command global attention, independent enough to reject royal control. If that balance shifted, the entire public image around them could change. International coverage expanded rapidly, because this was not just a British palace story anymore. In America, commentators framed it through celebrity, family conflict, and personal freedom. In Britain, many viewed it through duty, hierarchy, and the limits of royal privilege. Across both sides, the same question kept returning with sharp force: can a royal title survive when the royal role behind it no longer exists in the same form? For Meghan, the emotional weight of that question was enormous. Her story had been built around transformation, struggle, reinvention, and resistance. But this alleged decree threatened to recast that story from escape to exclusion, from independence to removal, from chosen distance to enforced separation. That is why the moment felt so deeply personal, even as officials avoided emotional language. Behind every constitutional phrase sat a human reality: pride, hurt, identity, and the fear of being written out of a history that still shaped public life. Competing interpretations only made the moment more explosive. Some saw a monarchy protecting itself, others saw a family closing ranks. But all understood that something had shifted, and once royal status becomes uncertain, every future appearance carries a different shadow. But beyond the headlines and reactions, the alleged decree carried a deeper symbolic meaning that reached far beyond any single individual. Throughout royal history, moments of apparent administrative change often reveal something much larger. They become symbols of what the institution values, what it fears, and what it believes must be protected at all costs. That is why the alleged Sunrise Decree was quickly interpreted as more than a technical question about Meghan Sussex's status. To many observers, it became a message about the meaning of the crown itself. The monarchy has always survived by turning private family matters into public lessons of continuity. Abdications, marriages, divorces, removals, restorations, and title changes have never been only personal. They have acted like warning bells, reminding the nation that royal identity depends on service, discipline, and sacrifice. Reports suggest that this was the deeper fear behind the Sussex controversy. It was not simply that Meghan lived far from royal duty. It was that the symbols of royal life might begin to look separate from the responsibilities that gave them meaning. In a modern world shaped by fame, branding, and constant media attention, that danger becomes sharper. Tradition can seem cold, modernization can seem necessary. But when modernization blurs the difference between public duty and personal platform, the institution begins to ask a harder question. What is being modernized and what is being lost? Within royal culture, symbols matter because symbols carry trust. A title is not only a name on a page. It is a signal to the public that the person carrying it stands in some kind of relationship with the crown's work, its limits, and its burdens. If that signal becomes unclear, then public confidence begins to weaken quietly, not in one dramatic collapse, but in small doubts repeated over time. Analysts reportedly examined the wider implications with caution because any move touching royal status could open debates about fairness, law, precedent, and power. Yet even those who questioned the alleged decree understood why the issue carried force. The monarchy is built on inherited meaning. It cannot survive if every inherited symbol becomes negotiable, portable, or detached from duty. That is why legacy became the dominant theme. For King Charles, it raised questions about what kind of reign he would leave behind during a fragile period of transition. For William, it pointed toward the monarchy he may one day lead. For Meghan, it threatened to change how history records his place within the royal story. And for the institution, it became a test of whether the crown still had the will to define its own boundaries. The alleged decree, whether seen as firm, unfair, necessary, or severe, carried one unmistakable message. The old rules may bend under pressure, but they do not disappear without a fight. And as the dust began to settle, attention turned toward what this extraordinary moment could mean for the monarchy's future. Whether every rumor proves accurate or not, one fact remains undeniable. The debate surrounding Meghan's Sussex status has become a defining story of the modern monarchy, and its consequences may echo for years to come. What began as whispers of a sunrise decree soon grew into something far more powerful than one alleged document moving through royal channels. It became a national argument about what a title means, what service requires, and how far the crown can bend before its own shape begins to change. For some, the controversy exposed the monarchy's need to protect itself from confusion, branding, and blurred boundaries. For others, it raised uncomfortable questions about fairness, family loyalty, and whether old institutions can ever truly handle modern independence without turning cold. But in the middle of that debate stood the same unavoidable truth. The Sussex era changed the royal conversation forever. Meghan and Harry's departure did not simply remove two people from royal duty. It forced the monarchy to confront a future where titles could travel beyond palace walls, where royal identity could become part of global media culture, and where public trust had to be protected with sharper rules than before. Reports of the alleged decree only intensified that reckoning. It pushed attention toward William's coming age of leadership, Catherine's steady place within the working royal model, and King Charles's struggle to hold the institution together during one of its most fragile chapters. The palace, according to observers, now faces a difficult task. It must appear stable without seeming harsh. It must protect tradition without looking trapped in the past. It must honor family ties while reminding the world that the crown is not merely a family possession. That balance will define what comes next. Future developments may clarify the rumors, challenge them, or reshape them entirely, but the symbolic damage has already been done. The question of Meghan's Sussex status has become a mirror held up to the monarchy itself. It asks whether duty still sits above fame. It asks whether legacy can survive personal conflict. It asks whether the House of Windsor can enter a new era without losing the old discipline that made it endure. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so final, even while so much remains uncertain. The alleged sunrise decree may be remembered as a turning point, or it may fade into the long fog of royal speculation. But the debate it unleashed will not vanish easily because it speaks to something deeper than paperwork. It speaks to identity, loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of belonging to an institution older than any individual story. Because in the House of Windsor, titles may come and go, but the struggle over legacy, loyalty, and the future of the crown never truly ends. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.